Warriors Unite! Back with another episode of Vjkn Warriors 2 and the 1% Club. I think this is episode, I'm not trying to give any episodes because I'm getting near 1,000. I think it's 983, episode 983. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope you guys are continuing on your conquesting yourselves, which is what this really is all about, and focusing on under God's purposes, conquesting things around you, because you're able to learn the great skill and the blessing from God of self-control. And that's the whole key here. So we're going to talk about Elvis and Bruce Lee. So before we do that, let's do some shout-outs. Jerry, channel should be called The Bottom Line. I like that, Jerry. I like that. It's great idea. Vjkn, thank you, my friend. The real Spencer Roberts, thank you. Skysoltani, antipsychotics. I have to look into that. That's a nice topic. I'll have to look into that and see. That guy, again, Austin Powers retained. He probably did. We'll talk about that in a second with Elvis and Bruce Lee a little bit. Johnnie, thank you, my friend. Wonderful Argos. Too much sun. I think you can get too much sun. I don't really go in the sun. I haven't done that for years. I've seen people be in the sun too much. Skin gets wrinkly, all kinds of stuff after a number of years. So I don't like it myself. Righteous Reaper X, thank you. Day 172, like his dad. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate that. Looking young. So that's the whole idea, my friend. Trying to stay in shape, trying to stay at the high value male we can be. We just keep trying. Mafree. Wet Dreams is a relapse. I don't think it was. We just did one on relapse with Wet Dreams. I don't believe that's the case. I think the evil one, again, is testing us. But again, the whole thing is that this is a lifestyle, so it doesn't really matter. Gio the Genius, thank you. TKO, thank you. Wally Ay, thank you. Rudy, thank you. God's Gladiator, thank you. And Johnnie, thank you, my friend. Thank you. All right. So our topic comes from us a number of people, but I'm going to say we talk about Rudy, I think, kind of gave us it. Let's talk about Elvis a little bit and Bruce Lee. So I've done a little bit of research, and I've taken Wikipedia and different articles and things like that. So let me first say, I'm not an expert on Bruce Lee or Elvis. I'm going to try to apply this to Semen Retention and the price of fame. So this may be a little bit longer one, but we'll kind of see as we go through this a little bit. All right, so incidentally, there's a lot of connections here in things that we talk about with what happened to both Bruce Lee and Elvis Presley. Now, this was back when I was a kid in the teenage years. I think Bruce Lee died in 73 and Elvis in 77, something like that. So both of these men were iconic, and both of them represented a strong masculinity. And I think that's important to kind of think about, because we don't see that type of figures out there. It's actually kind of told us against that with this toxic masculinity movement that was going on for the last 10 years. I think it's changing again as we get certain people in government, certain things going on. I think it changes and coming back to the original idea of what masculinity is and how important that is, not this new definition of masculinity that makes no sense and becomes wimpy. So Bruce Lee, obviously, and you just look at Enter the Dragon, and Elvis with his singing in movies, Spin Out, different things movie, that you can see. He was definitely a masculine male, almost as we talk about Dean Martin and Sinatra, a lot of these guys from the old days. So they had a lot of fame. Obviously, they're icons, and so you can see that connection as well. The trouble that happened, and it's interesting because when you look at this, I believe, and this is just in reading all this and looking at this, I believe that they both practiced semen retention. Whether they did it purposely or not, that part I don't know. I never read anything that said either one did it purposely. But when you look at people who have been successful, going all the way back to the time of the philosophers and Newton and St. Augustine, all these people, even to the present day, when we had boxers like Tyson and Mike Tyson and Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, and a lot of these people who've talked about retention. A lot of times people are doing it even though they may not know they're really doing it. Tesla's a good example as well over the year, Nikola Tesla, looking at the idea of, okay, I'm going to keep my seed. I'm not going to have sexual relations. I'm certainly not going to release, and I'm going to transmute that, whether it's direct or indirect, into other things. and getting involved in the work. So Mike Tyson obviously did that with boxing, and the same thing with Muhammad Ali and things like that. So they did not have sex, and a lot of athletes don't do that. So we know that they must have been doing some sort of retention, because early on, from what I've read, is Bruce Lee didn't do a lot of, he took aspirins and different types of supplements, types of things, that sedatives, and there's reading in a book, you look at things like cannabis, and now recently they've said that he he had taken drugs and things like that. I don't know that for sure, but I'll tell you what is important to realize is early on, both of these people, and Elvis was another one, who I guess one time the woman who played Elvira, I saw this, I read this somewhere, who had run into Elvis and said she was doing cannabis, and Elvis was appalled. So early on, when Elvis was successful and doing all the things he was doing, he also didn't take a lot of drugs and other things. I personally believe, as I've gone through this and doing the cycle over the years of different types of things, is that I don't believe the body needs drugs as much as we think. And certainly, I don't think, obviously, drugs for recreational purpose, all those things. Now, I remember growing up as a small kid in the late 60s and early 70s, and 9, 10, 11 years old. And, they did studies back in the days with LSD, and a guy named Timothy Leary, I think it was Harvard, talked about, tuning in, tuning out, things like that, all kinds of different sayings he had. He tested students in Stanford and Harvard, different places, on LSD. And you could see a lot of artists back then. A lot of those songs in the 60s that I used to grow up with, or a lot of those drug-related songs, because drugs were what inspired people, and they felt like that's what really needed to inspire people to do that. So when you look at the late 60s, which is where Elvis made a comeback in the late 60s, and Bruce Lee became very popular, within late 60s. I remember one of my favorite shows, his Bruce Lee show, is The Green Hornet. It only lasted about a year or so, I think. But Bruce Lee was great as Kato. I mean, he was tremendous. And I remember even watching the Batman shows when Bruce Lee was, battling against Robin. It was just no match. Bruce Lee was just unbelievable. And so, obviously, then I got interested in watching some of Bruce Lee, and I enjoyed that up until his untimely passing. But when you look at the late 60s and early 70s, drugs, things like that were very common, especially underground, because people felt like it was going to enhance them. And so I do believe, in reading in Bruce Lee's case, that he had some sort of, he may have had some kind of allergy to aspirin. And he had some sedatives that he took for a while. But when you look at the success of these individuals, their success really came on the energy level they had. And the first thing I got to say is that both of them worked really hard. You could see that in all the movies, and they were just nonstop. And I think part of the autopsies that some of these people put together over the years has said that Elvis and Bruce Lee just worked themselves to the point where they were just very tired, and so part of it was maybe because of all the things Bruce Lee did, especially in his movies, and Elvis is just continuing touring and all the things he did to them. It was probably because their bodies just wore down to some level, and then obviously other things played into it as well. But the fact is that it really kind of brings us back to the point we always talk about, and that the fact is that you have to, you got to have some balance, your goals, things like that. And I think the price of fame in many cases is the fact that you've got to keep going. You've got to keep doing something. You've got to keep making money. You've got to keep being successful, and people expect that. I believe we have a society in which people get pushed up only to get knocked down again. A great coach that the Chicago Bears had at one time, Mike Ditka, said that this is what society does. They propped you up, but only to kind of fall down at some point when you get too big. And you see that with all the stars we've had over the years, whether it was media, sports, or music, or arts, whatever it might be. So when we see this, we know that Bruce Lee and Elvis were put up there, and the icons they are. But the trouble is that comes at a price. And that's why we call this thing, what is the price of fame here? Both Elvis and Bruce Lee, they suffered because of that. the stress level, you can just imagine, was incredible for both of those guys to keep up the amount of work, especially in the late 60s and in Bruce Lee's case, early 70s with movies he made and all the popularity that he had, because all his movies did tremendously. And that led to trying to keep himself in a certain kind of condition as well. In Bruce Lee's case, his was more physical because of all the martial arts stuff that he kind of pushed through and kind of set up for the society along, and bringing Chuck Norris, and I think Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was also part of his, and Sharon Tate, a lot of people who actually worked with him, in learning about martial arts. That was a big craze back in the early 70s, and all his movies, obviously, we saw that. And so as he progressed, I'm sure there was a lot of pressure on him to maintain that physical level and to maintain the level that he needed to do his movies. And so as I read a lot of things about, him, having cannabis in his stomach when he passed away, who knows if that played a role. He also had aspirin, from what I'm reading, and a sedative, which he always took, but this could also have led to conditions. And I think he had some sort of something happened to him a few months earlier, and I think that was another suggestion. And also they found letters of him talking to people on one of the movies and asking for cocaine and things like that. So you don't know exactly what ended up happening with this, and it could have been a combination of things. But I think it wasn't that uncommon back then when I was 10, 12 years old reading about all this, because people did drugs all the time. They didn't think it was a bad thing. In fact, because of a lot of the studies and the information that came out, this was something that enhanced people, enhance their imagination, enhance their ability to do things, and enhance their physical ability. So a lot of people felt this was something that you need to do. Now, it wasn't until that we found out with the sexual revolution in the 60s and early 70s that the consequences of this is to kind of hurt your own body. And so Bruce Lee is a good example that no matter how physically fit he was, he at some point, his body collapsed on him. And the reasons we don't know. I mean, there's also speculation, again, with both of these, that maybe someone killed him as well. Who knows? The same thing with Elvis, who knows? But the bottom line is you could tell that he was struggling at times as he was getting a little bit older as well. And you could see that he was, he could have probably gotten involved in some things that he probably would look back on and say, maybe I don't need to do that. But those things kind of happen. And again, when you're an icon and you're out there, you can see that, it's tough to avoid temptation. And that's really what we're talking about here. This is why no matter who you are, I don't care if you're the richest man in the world, I don't care if you're the best athlete in the world, the smartest person in the world, the most romantic person in the world, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter, at what level, because the bottom line really is that the hardest challenge you're ever going to have is the one of controlling yourself. And so in Bruce Lee's case, obviously he was at the point where, he had to continue to outdo Bruce Lee. And that puts a lot of pressure and stress. So it's very possible that he did some things that didn't probably help his body at all. And along with his strenuous type activities and things like that. So you guys can do a little more reading on this and look at, like I said, I got Wikipedia and a couple of things. And obviously Wikipedia as a teacher, I know, is not always credible. So, you got to take it with a grain of salt here. And maybe I don't have all the information, facts. I'm not going to say I'm an expert, of course. But in reading it, it does look like that, once again, the price of success and being an icon with martial arts and the movies and like that kind of gave him temptation. And I'm sure, it was hard for him not to be tempted about things like that, especially as you're making money. The thing about it is that when you're making money and you're at the point where you're up there, it's hard if you don't really keep, you keep your foundation. Your foundation should be your religion, your focus on God, in my case, Jesus Christ. And you should be calm and realize, I don't need the money. And if you don't really need the money, you're going to get abundance, of course. But the thing is that that money brings a lot of unsavory characters, other things around, and perhaps that was what affected, Bruce Lee a little bit as well. This is all speculation, but I think the thing is to remember that, the price of fame is hard. And I think certainly when you see that, that's the key. Now, I do think, however, going back to the original question, is that he did practice. I think Rudy, he did practice. I'm sure he practiced semen retention. He may have not called it that. He may have been brahmacharya. It could have been, sophism. It could have been just celibacy. But he obviously did. Because a man, when they lose their sexual energy, you could see the drive is gone, the energy is gone, the physical appearance is gone, and that didn't happen to Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee looked unbelievable. So, because of that type of skill, you knew he was doing it. So I would say he did it. And again, the price of fame, who knows what ended up happening to him, but I think certainly it probably was a toll on him, and it probably eventually took his life. So it's unfortunate because I like Bruce Lee a lot, especially as Kato. So, all right. So now let's go to Elvis Presley a little bit. Elvis, I think another case like that where I loved Elvis Presley, and in my mind, one of the unbelievable types of singers. But again, when he first started, and especially back in the 50s, when I remember him and Sinatra doing some stuff together, and I remember that he was on the Ed Sullivan Show. Now you young guys may not know Ed Sullivan, but he was a famous TV host back in those days, back in the 1950s. And so, I kind of remember seeing a lot of those type of shows when I was a kid. And he had a certain charisma, personality, and also he's very religious at that point when he was younger. And again, the way he moved, the way he acted, you knew, just like a Muhammad Ali back in the early 60s, you knew that he had kept, his retention. So again, I would say, in this case, Rudy asked me a question. I know you didn't ask the question about Bruce Lee, but a few other people did. So I kind of combine these guys together because there's a lot of similarities between the two. I think both of them practice semen retention, but I think they both probably succumb to temptations. And in case of Elvis, again, his earlier days, the movies he made, phenomenal. When he looked thin, he looked tremendous before, in the early 60s and late 50s, early 60s, up until, his comeback in 68. I think he was just, an aura of, not falling for temptation. But this is where, warriors, that you can learn lessons from all this, that the bottom line really is the person you're fighting against is yourself, because that's what a challenge temptation is. Just like all the empires we've talked about in the past, they destroyed themselves from within because they could not control their basic natures. And because of that, the natures controlled them. So in this case, in the 60s, I think, as Elvis went on tour, he was a huge success. He, Las Vegas, lots of places, he started making money. But obviously, as that came with a price. And again, the price is a temptation that he could not say no to eventually. So obviously, he got involved in drugs, and obviously his health started deteriorating, and he had a lot of issues with those type of things. And, that kind of led down to his downfall as well. And again, as you get into that cycle, one of the things it's hard to see that. And other people who may not understand this whole process of retention and probably didn't think, that they could do anything to help him with it. And plus, I think a lot of people just wanted to kind of continue to have him making movies, making records, things like that. And so I think, just like with Bruce Lee, there's a lot of pressure put on both of these guys to continue to produce. And this is what happens when you're making lots of money and you're an icon like Elvis and Bruce Lee. You're doing that case. It's not that much different than what I've talked about with Bela Lugosi back in the movie star back in, who was typecast as Dracula, one of the best Draculas in my mind of all time. But I liked him better than Nosferatu and the other guys that they've had out there. But again, he kind of, got into barbiturates and different things like that. And so again, he was another one that was at a point where, the fame and things got to him to the point where he felt invulnerable. He could do anything and that nothing could hurt him. And then he got addicted to drugs and amphetamines and different things like that, which was very, around easily back in the early 70s. And then so I think, once again, Elvis got himself into that type of situation as well, and he just could not say no. And because of that whole drug revolution back in the late 60s, sexual drug revolution, it was really difficult to say no. You know, I saw this a lot just in areas that I was brought up in. You know, you just see just basic teenagers, basic people, not icons, and just regular people that we're talking about here. And those people had trouble saying no. And so it was something very common for the young people to get involved with. And of course, you know, both Elvis and both Bruce Lee at the time were young. I mean, they're probably in the 20s, you know, up until their death, 20, 25, 30, 30s, early 30s, I think. With Bruce Lee case and Elvis. And so when you're talking about this, they both were, victims of the system that was around, where people, didn't think there was any kind of major types of problems with, doing drugs and things like that. And some people have allergies, which I think we talked about with Bruce Lee a little bit. And you never know what happens, and nowadays you see this a lot. And so how can we take these examples of both Elvis and Bruce Lee to kind of look at these and see, okay, well, how can we affect these and things that we're doing? Well, when we see this, the whole key to looking at this is to understand that you can actually go ahead and focus on having your goals, setting things up where things are going to work a certain way. But on the other hand, you got to focus on the fact that, okay, you cannot allow temptation to kind of get in the way of things that you're doing. And so the temptation is the hardest part of this whole thing. And so as you focus on achieving your goals, you're going to run into temptation. That's the thing that's going to keep you away from being that high value male. And in both the cases of Bruce Lee and Elvis Presley, the temptations are out there. Now, we talk about the temptation a lot on this channel with obviously sexual temptation, whether it's pictures and releasing that way, or just women and other types of things influencing you to release right away. And so the whole purpose of the channel is to get people to learn self-control and to say no, because that's going to keep you healthy. It's going to keep you longevity as long as possible. Now, who knows how long each person lives? I think that's something that our Creator determines. But I think it's every right of the person and every responsibility of the person to keep themselves in a temple of God as much as possible. And that's keeping yourself in better shape. And that means not only controlling your self-sexual nature, but certainly the same thing when fasting, which I just came off of, from 8 o'clock last night to 12 o'clock. So you're talking I don't know how long it was. 4 is 8. And let me count it. Now I'm thinking about it. Let's count it. So it was 4, and then all the way until 12. So 16-hour type of fast. So those type of things, I do, and I'm trying to do longer ones and different ones, a day fast here and things like that. Those things heighten your body, your energy. You're not just dying because of sugar or carbs or things like that. You're trying to become better and better each time. And this is really important. So again, guys, thank you, Rudy, and all you guys asking me about Elvis and asked me about Bruce Lee. I think both are shining examples of tremendous icons who built their life and history on, focusing on retention, energy, controlling themselves to some point. And then obviously it's also a good example of the other type of thing where, temptation get a hold of anybody and, kind of turn the direction a little bit. And unfortunately, neither one of them could really recover, at least unless they were murdered, of course. We don't know that, but, that's the type of thing. So unfortunately, it's a good example of both, of things you have to watch out for, especially as you become successful. And I do think everybody who is under retention is going to become successful. It's just a matter of time. But then you have to also realize the responsibility of that and to then control the temptation so the temptation doesn't overwhelm you. Just like with women. I have it all the time. You're going to have women attracted to you. They're going to flirt with you. They're going to talk with you. But the thing is, can you control yourself and just look at it as a flattery type of thing? Or in the case if you want to have a relationship with a person, is it something you can build in a relationship with? Obviously, it's nice to have that attention, but you also have to recognize those consequences that you have to behave yourself and also be responsible along with that. So, all right, my friends. Well, anyway, we had a little bit longer on this one, but I wanted to kind of focus both on Bruce Lee and Elvis. I think certainly it's an interesting, as I read more about it, it's interesting for both of those. There's a lot of comparisons there between their successes and what they did. And the temptations and things that happened to him as well. So thank you guys for all those comments, and Rudy especially, I appreciate your question on that as well. All right, so anyway, I hope you guys have a great Sunday. Please use it to follow and use it as Sabbath day and try to talk with God and with your Creator and become closer and closer to Him each day, each hour, every day. So, all right, until then, my friend, 2 things I'll leave you with. 1, every day is a new day to a great warrior, and you guys are all great warriors. And number 2, we always have to continue to realize, as Elvis, as Bruce Lee shows us, we always have to be aware of temptation and come through you as overeating, drugs, alcohol, any sort of kind of addiction can destroy you because you're not the foundation is not God. And so this is why you got to put the helmet on, the shield on, and we have to always remember to battle on! God bless you guys. Have a great Sunday. Bye-bye.